Hey Indonesia, how's the Java-Bali electricity grid holding up during these mid-June blackouts? We're talking about millions of people across West Java and Bandung Raya suddenly losing power during crucial exam weeks, with local microenterprises losing up to 50% of their daily revenues just because one power plant went dark. But if you look closely at the engineering reports, the actual sequence of events is wild. It was not a freak explosion or even a major accident. A massive gas turbine at PLTGU Jawa 1 in Karawang was undergoing scheduled maintenance, meaning the grid was already running without Unit 1's 880 megawatt capacity when a series of technical snags hit during its restart preparation. Normally, a healthy grid would not even flinch at this, but this operation delay pulled the trigger on a systemic domino effect that had been quietly brewing for months under our feet. What's wild is that the Indonesian cheap local mandate, formerly known as the domestic market obligation, actually starved the grid of its backup safety margins long before the gas plant tripped. Under this policy, the Indonesian government forces mining companies to sell at least 25% of their coal domestically to the state utility PLN at an artificially frozen price cap for $70 a ton. But as global market prices skyrocketed, miners were suddenly looking at massive profits overseas because domestic production costs were also rising, with stripping ratios climbing to between 8 and 12. Supplying locals at that capped $70 rate felt like a massive financial penalty. So mining companies naturally prioritized exporting their coal or selling it to domestic industries like cement factories that were willing to pay the full uncapped market rate. This economic friction left PLN with a massive 20 million ton coal supply deficit. And because the baseload steam plants ran completely dry of fuel, they had to quietly turn down their power, draining the grid's reserve margins down to practically zero. So when the Karawang gas turbine faced delays, the starving coal plants literally did not have the fuel to ramp up and save the day, forcing PLN to implement rolling blackouts across several provinces to keep the entire network from collapsing. Indonesia's vast untapped natural energy wealth would have easily prevented this. We are literally sitting on a goldmine of resources that generate practically free, highly abundant electricity without ever requiring us to buy fuel. I'm talking about solar energy coming directly from the sun, and also from geothermal power, where you literally just drill pipes into the ground and get infinite volcanic heat. Once you build the physical turbines, the running cost of the fuel is $0 forever. We do not have to worry about fuel costs or global market supply because the sun and the earth does not charge for its heat. And yet, instead of plugging into this unlimited fuel-free power, Indonesians are stuck managing a grid that breaks down over a single glitch. The problem is that Indonesia's equatorial solar energy potential is currently being strangled by protective domestic manufacturing policies. We are talking about the largest archipelagic state on Earth, spanning 3,500 kilometers directly along the equator. That is the most extensive equatorial territory on the entire planet, meaning that 365 days of intense direct sunlight every year. Yet, solar power represents less than 2% of Indonesia's total energy generation. The main culprit is a local content rule called TKDN, which forces developers to buy domestic solar panels to support local industry. But because Indonesia's local solar manufacturing is underdeveloped, these domestic panels ended up being 49% more expensive than competitive imports. This massive cost premium completely priced forces out private developers who rely on competitive global supply chains. When you combine that with rigid utility regulations like Regulation 50/2017, which legally forbids PLN from paying clean energy developers any more than the local cost of generation, a benchmark that is already being dragged down to artificially low levels by cheap subsidized locals, it becomes financially impossible for a clean solar farm to survive, especially when they're only depending on locally produced solar panels. So you are essentially forcing a brand new clean technology to compete in a game that has been completely rigged from the start to protect subsidized fossil fuels. Indonesians are also completely missing how the massive Indonesian nickel storage supply sits completely disconnected from our local electrical grid. Indonesia holds the largest nickel reserves on the planet, which is the exact critical mineral needed to manufacture the high-density lithium-ion batteries that stabilize intermittent solar grids. Let's be real here. Solar power is obviously not a 24-hour resource. The sun is only up for a fraction of the day. So if you do not have a massive utility-scale batteries to capture that midday spike, solar is basically useless for powering the country after dark. While Western nations scramble to build complex global supply chains to secure battery minerals, we sit directly on the raw minerals. Yet trying to connect clean battery projects to Indonesia's centralized grid is an administrative nightmare. It is the exact same zombie project bottleneck we see in developed grids like the United Kingdom, where over 200 billion pounds of clean energy projects are stuck waiting up to 15 years for connection. In Indonesia, speculative developers with no capital or active planning consent apply for connections and then clogging up the queue and shutting out legitimate green projects for years while the whole system stagnates. We need to look at how Indonesia's volcanic geothermal reserves can completely bypass the entire problem with coal. The country sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is a massive 40,000 kilometers horseshoe of intense tectonic activity that forms the largest and most active volcano chain on Earth. Indonesia holds a staggering 40% of the entire planet's geothermal potential along this belt, the largest share of any single country on Earth. This provides high-pressure underground system that runs 24 hours a day, completely unaffected by the night. I mean, you literally just drill, baby, drill, and once the well is in the ground, you have an infinite clean steam turbine running forever without ever having to buy another ounce of coal. It is the ultimate baseload replacement for coal. But development has been painfully slow because early stage exploration drilling is incredibly high risk. Developers can spend millions of dollars drilling a well with zero guarantee of actually hitting a viable steam pocket. Without bankable de-risking instruments or massive concessional financing, private capital simply walks away, leaving 40% of the world's geothermal potential trapped underground, while Indonesia continues to burn dirty coal. To clear this mess, Indonesia's outdated power connection queue must be immediately rebuilt to break this grid's bottleneck. Instead of using a traditional first-come, first-served model that lets non-viable projects camp out in line indefinitely, Indonesia needs to transition to a gated progression system. This is the exact model currently being implemented by the UK's National Energy System Operator to clear their backlog. Under this setup, developers must meet strict readiness criteria, including proven land rights, active planning permits, and upfront capital commitments to keep their spot in line. Speculative projects are hit with progressive commitment fees that are forfeited if they stall, effectively weeding out the zombies. For a legitimate green developer, this clears the highway. For small business owners in Bandung or Java, it means the rapid deployment of a modern decentralized grid that won't leave them in the dark. Looking back, the recent Java power blackouts prove that Indonesia's current energy trajectory is a terminal failure, relying on an inflexible, subsidized fuel source, meaning that Indonesia will keep blacking out every single time a gas turbine in Karawang shuts down due to a basic technical glitch. The sun, on the other hand, will always rise every day, and if geothermal in the Ring of Fire ever runs dry, the world is in deeper shit than you can ever imagine. Indonesians need to realize that Indonesia's unlimited renewable energy reserves could generate cheap, practically free energy for the entire country. It is incredibly painful to watch a nation with so much natural wealth struggle in the dark, especially when the solution sits right under their feet. Indonesia have the heat, the sun, and the metal. We just need the courage to use them instead of letting the entire grid freeze up when a single gas turbine in Karawang shuts down. So yeah, it's time to turn the lights back out. Subscribe.